The galaxy's most classified document sits locked in a vault so secure it requires 17 different access codes, a retinal scan, and a promise not to laugh out loud while reading it. The vault itself is located in a secret facility that doesn't officially exist, guarded by beings who have signed non-disclosure agreements so comprehensive they're legally forbidden from acknowledging their own existence. The document is exactly 43 pages long, written in blood-red ink on paper made from the surrender documents of conquered worlds, and bears the official seal of the Galactic Military High Command, alongside a sticky note that simply reads, "Never again." At the bottom of page 43, in handwriting that grows increasingly erratic as it progresses, is a signature that once struck fear into the hearts of entire star systems. General Korthak Doomwhisper, Supreme Commander of Annihilation, Crusher of Dreams, and holder of the galactic record for most terrifying battle cry. But the signature isn't what makes this document so dangerous. What makes it dangerous is the single word stamped across every page in letters so large they required their own postal district: abort. The story begins, as most galactic catastrophes do, with a committee meeting. "Gentlemen," announced Admiral Florgax Thunderbeak, his triple-jointed neck swiveling to address the assembled War Council, "we have a problem." The War Council of the Andromeda Conquest Division was not accustomed to problems. They were accustomed to solutions that involved large explosions, strategic intimidation, and the occasional strongly worded diplomatic note written in the blood of their enemies. Problems were what happened to other people, usually just before those other people became former people. "What kind of problem?" asked General Blastock Skullcrusher, whose name was disappointingly accurate given that his skull-crushing record stood at an impressive 4,012. He had been aiming for 5,000 before retirement, but the galaxy was running low on suitable skulls. "Intelligence reports indicate the existence of a planet that may require our attention," Admiral Thunderbeak continued, consulting his holographic display with the sort of expression normally reserved for discovering something unpleasant on the bottom of one's boot. "A planet?" General Korthak Doomwhisper leaned forward, his interest piqued. "What makes this planet special? Do they have advanced weaponry, psychic powers, an unusual resistance to conventional intimidation techniques?" "Well," the Admiral said slowly, "according to our scouts, they call themselves humans." A collective shrug rippled through the assembled generals. The galaxy was full of species with ridiculous names. The Blogothians had seemed threatening until you realized their entire military strategy was based on synchronized nose-honking. The Quizzleblats had surrendered immediately upon learning that conquest involved actual fighting rather than competitive poetry recitation. "And?" prompted General Skullcrusher. "And they appear to have developed a civilization based on—" "This is where it gets strange. Voluntary cooperation." The room fell silent. Voluntary cooperation was a concept so alien to the Andromedan military mindset that their translators had to create an entirely new word for it, which roughly translated as "impossible thing that makes brain hurt." "You mean they work together without being threatened?" asked Colonel Griselda Painstalker, her voice heavy with disbelief. "Apparently so. They share resources, exchange information freely, and even engage in something called helping, where they perform tasks for each other without expectation of immediate compensation. That's—" General Doomwhisper struggled to find the words. "That's the most devious psychological warfare strategy I've ever heard of. They're obviously planning something massive." "My thoughts exactly," Admiral Thunderbeak nodded grimly, "which is why we need our absolute best agent to investigate. Someone who can penetrate their defenses, analyze their capabilities, and determine the nature of this threat." Every head in the room turned to look at General Korthak Doomwhisper. Korthak was a legend among legends, a being so formidable that his military academy had retired his locker number out of respect. He stood 9 feet tall when he wasn't trying to be intimidating, and somewhere around 11 feet when he was. His forearms were each capable of wielding a different weapon simultaneously, and his collection of scars told the story of every major conflict in the past 50 years. He had once ended a war by simply walking onto the battlefield and asking very politely if anyone would like to surrender before he started feeling creative. His psychological warfare techniques were the stuff of military legend. He had convinced the entire Blorgnox Empire to switch careers from galactic menace to interior design consultants, simply by asking them if they really thought their planet's color scheme was working for them. He had ended the siege of Grimmeth by teaching the defenders to play poker, then winning their entire military budget in a single hand. Most impressively, he had once conquered an entire solar system during his lunch break and still had time to pick up his dry cleaning on the way home. "You want me to conduct reconnaissance on a planet of beings who practice voluntary cooperation?" Korthak asked, his voice carrying the sort of dangerous calm that usually preceded someone having a very bad day. "Precisely. We need to understand their capabilities before they can deploy this helping strategy against us on a galactic scale." Korthak considered this. In his extensive military experience, the most dangerous enemies were always the ones who appeared harmless. The Fluffington bunny people had seemed adorable until they revealed their mastery of explosive adorableness. The giggling gnomes of Glee had been dismissed as harmless until their weaponized humor campaign had reduced 3 star systems to helpless laughter. If these humans had weaponized voluntary cooperation, they could potentially be the most dangerous enemy the galaxy had ever faced. "Very well," Korthak said finally. "I'll take the assignment. How long do you need me to observe them?" "Standard protocol calls for a 72-hour assessment period," Admiral Thunderbeak replied. "That should be sufficient to evaluate their military potential and psychological warfare capabilities." 72 hours? Korthak almost smiled. He had conquered entire civilizations in less time. Consider it done. 3 days later, Korthak Doomwhisper was strapped into the pilot seat of the most advanced stealth reconnaissance vessel in the Andromedan fleet. The ship, designation Whisper of Death, was equipped with cloaking technology so sophisticated it was essentially invisible to every known form of detection. It could slip through planetary defenses like a shadow through moonlight, land undetected in the heart of enemy territory, and extract its pilot before anyone realized they'd been infiltrated. The ship's AI, which had been programmed with the personality of a particularly sardonic military strategist, provided commentary as they approached Earth's solar system. "Entering target system now, General," the AI announced in its characteristic tone of barely restrained boredom. "Initial scans indicate 1 yellow star, 8 planets, and an absolutely ridiculous number of asteroids that appear to be arranged with no tactical consideration whatsoever." "What about defenses?" Korthak asked, reviewing the tactical displays. "Scanning for orbital defense platforms. Negative. Searching for deep space early warning systems. Negative. Looking for any indication that they've noticed our approach. Still negative. Either they're running the most sophisticated stealth defense network in galactic history, or they haven't invented proper space-based military technology yet. Or they're so confident in their abilities they don't feel the need for conventional defenses," Korthak mused. "Proceed with caution." "Always do, General, always do. Oh, this is interesting." "What?" "I'm detecting thousands of artificial satellites in orbit around the 3rd planet. They appear to be... Wait, this can't be right." "What can't be right?" "According to my analysis, most of these satellites are broadcasting entertainment and communication signals. Not military intelligence, not strategic coordination, not tactical data streams. Entertainment." Korthak frowned. "Entertainment satellites? That's obviously a cover for their real purpose. What's the actual function?" "Well, let me dig deeper. analyzing signal content, cross-referencing with known psychological warfare patterns. No, General, I think they really are entertainment satellites. I'm detecting what appear to be comedy programs, music broadcasts, educational content about cooking, and something called reality television that seems to involve watching ordinary people engage in manufactured drama. They're broadcasting their psychological warfare techniques openly. Either that, or they really do have satellites dedicated to showing people how to prepare food and watch other people argue about relationships. This was worse than Korthak had thought. If humans were so confident in their military superiority that they could afford to broadcast their psychological warfare methods for everyone to see, they represented a threat level beyond anything in his experience. "Take us down," he ordered. "I need to see these beings up close." The landing was flawless, which was exactly what Korthak had expected from the Whisper of Death. The ship's stealth systems were so advanced that it could land in the middle of a crowded area without anyone noticing. The AI had selected a landing site based on tactical analysis, an area with moderate population density, multiple escape routes, and what appeared to be a large structure that could serve as an observation post. What the AI hadn't mentioned was that the large structure was something humans called a shopping mall, and the landing site was the middle of a parking lot on the day after Thanksgiving. Korthak emerged from his ship at exactly 6:30 a.m. on what humans called Black Friday, wearing full tactical gear and carrying enough weaponry to level a small city. His plan was simple: conduct surveillance, assess human military capabilities, and return to his ship with actionable intelligence. The first human he encountered was a 68-year-old retired schoolteacher named Gladys Hoffenheimer, who was sitting in a folding chair next to her car, drinking coffee from a thermos and reading a paperback novel. "Oh my," Gladys said, looking up from her book as Korthak approached. "You're certainly dressed warmly for this weather." Korthak paused. In his extensive military experience, first contact situations usually involved one of three responses: immediate surrender, desperate attempts at negotiation, or ill-advised attacks that resulted in swift defeat. He had never encountered someone who opened diplomatic relations by commenting on his choice of clothing. "I am General Korthak Doomwhisper," he announced, drawing himself up to his full, imposing height. "I have come to assess the military capabilities of your species." "Well, that's nice, dear," Gladys replied, marking her place in her book with a flower-shaped bookmark. "Are you with one of those military contractor companies? My late husband used to work for the government. He always said the military folks were very thorough in their assessments." Korthak blinked. The human had acknowledged his military status, but seemed completely unintimidated. Either she was an incredibly skilled operative, or she genuinely didn't understand the threat he represented. "You are not concerned by my presence?" he asked carefully. "Should I be? You seem polite enough. A little overdressed for shopping, but I suppose everyone has their own style. Are you waiting for the stores to open too?" "Stores?" "The mall, dear. Black Friday sales start at 7. I've been here since 4:30 to make sure I get a good spot in line. My granddaughter wants one of those new gaming systems, and they're supposed to be 70% off today." Korthak tried to process this information. The human had been sitting in a parking lot for over 2 hours, waiting for retail combat. "You engage in battle for consumer goods." "Battle?" Gladys laughed, a sound like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. "Oh, honey, it's not a battle." "Well, not usually. Sometimes people get a little pushy, but mostly everyone's pretty civilized about it. We all know the rules. There are rules for retail combat." "Of course. You wait in line, you don't cut, you don't grab things out of other people's hands, and if you see something someone else is looking at, you politely ask if they're planning to buy it before you take it. Basic courtesy." Korthak's military training had covered many scenarios, but none of them had included the possibility that humans had developed formal protocols for consumer warfare. "And everyone follows these rules." "Most people do. There's always a few bad apples, but the security guards handle them." Oh, speaking of which, you might want to put away some of those weapons before you go inside. The mall has a pretty strict policy about that sort of thing. Korthak looked down at his arsenal. He was carrying 2 plasma rifles, a gravity hammer, an assortment of thermal grenades, and a ceremonial sword that had been forged from the armor of his enemies. They have regulations regarding military hardware. They have regulations about everything, dear. No weapons, no pets except service animals, no outside food in the food court, no loitering, no loud music, no selling things without a permit. It's all very organized. The concept of a heavily regulated retail environment struck Korthak as simultaneously brilliant and terrifying. These humans had created elaborate rule systems for commerce that rivaled military codes of conduct. They had established order within chaos, imposed structure on what should have been anarchic competition for resources. How do they enforce these regulations? He asked. Security guards mostly. And cameras. Oh, they have cameras everywhere. For safety, you know. Plus, if people break the rules too badly, they can get banned from the mall. Nobody wants that, especially during sale season. Korthak felt a chill run down his spine. The humans had developed a panopticon surveillance system combined with social exclusion penalties. They had created a situation where voluntary compliance was maintained through the threat of being denied access to the consumer warfare arena. This was psychological warfare at a level that made his own techniques look primitive. I must observe this mall, he said finally. Oh, you'll love it. There's something for everyone. Clothes, electronics, books, jewelry, food. And today everything's on sale. Just remember to be patient. Lines can get pretty long, especially at the popular stores. As if summoned by her words, other humans began emerging from vehicles throughout the parking lot. They moved with purpose and organization that would have impressed a military logistics coordinator. Some carried large bags, others had small-wheeled containers, and a few were equipped with what appeared to be strategic communication devices. "Gladys!" called out another elderly human, approaching with a rolling cart and a determined expression. "Did you remember to bring the store map?" "Of course, Mildred. I've got the whole battle plan right here." Gladys produced a folded piece of paper covered in colored markings and annotations. Electronics first, then clothing, then home goods. If we stick to the schedule, we should be done by noon. Korthak stared at the document. It was a tactical map. The humans had created detailed strategic plans for their retail operations, complete with timing, target priorities, and fallback positions. You coordinate your shopping campaigns?" he asked weakly. "Oh, absolutely," Mildred replied cheerfully. "Black Friday is serious business. You can't just wander around randomly and expect to get the good deals. You need strategy, timing, and teamwork." "Teamwork?" "Of course. Gladys covers electronics while I handle clothing. We communicate via text message to coordinate our movements and share intelligence about stock levels and line lengths. It's all about efficiency." Korthak watched in growing amazement as more humans gathered near the mall entrance. They weren't a disorganized mob of consumers. They were tactical units, groups of 2 to 6 individuals, each with clearly defined roles and objectives. Some were scouts, moving ahead to assess conditions. Others were specialists, equipped with specific tools for their assigned tasks. A few appeared to be command personnel, coordinating multiple teams through their communication devices. And they were all doing it voluntarily. No one was forcing them to cooperate. No one was threatening them with punishment for failure. They had spontaneously organized themselves into an efficient military-style operation for the purpose of shopping. "The doors open in 23 minutes, announced a young male human wearing what appeared to be tactical clothing and carrying a military-style backpack. "I've got intel that Target is offering an additional 10% off if you use their store credit card. And Best Buy has a secret stash of gaming consoles they're not advertising." "How did you acquire this intelligence?" Korthak asked, his professional curiosity overcoming his shock. Read it, the young man replied, as if this explained everything. Also, my cousin works at Best Buy. Employee intel is always the most reliable. Employee intel? Yeah, the people who work at the stores usually know what's really going on. They'll tell you which deals are actually good and which ones are just marketing hype. You just have to ask nicely. Korthak filed this information away for later analysis. The humans had developed intelligence networks that relied on interpersonal relationships and voluntary information sharing. Their operatives were embedded throughout their own commercial infrastructure, and they shared tactical data through informal social connections. It was the most sophisticated intelligence operation he had ever encountered, and they were using it to optimize their shopping strategies. "Attention shoppers!" A voice echoed across the parking lot from speakers mounted near the mall entrance. "The mall will be opening in 15 minutes. Please have your payment methods ready, and remember that our return policy requires original receipts." The response was immediate and coordinated. The assembled humans began forming orderly lines near the entrance, organizing themselves by target destination and shopping priority. Korthak watched in fascination as they negotiated positions, shared information about store layouts, and discussed tactical modifications to their plans based on real-time intelligence. "First time Black Friday shopping?" asked Gladys, noticing his amazed expression. "First time observing your species' retail warfare protocols," Korthak replied honestly. "Retail warfare?" Gladys chuckled. "You military types certainly have a way with words, but I suppose there are some similarities. You need planning, coordination, and quick thinking. Plus, it helps to know when to retreat if things get too crazy." "You retreat?" "Sometimes. If a store is too crowded, or if the deals aren't as good as advertised, or if people start getting rude, it's better to cut your losses and try somewhere else. No point in wasting time and energy on a lost cause." Korthak nodded slowly. The humans had developed strategic withdrawal protocols for their commercial operations. They could assess changing conditions and adapt their tactics accordingly, abandoning unproductive objectives in favor of more promising opportunities. 10 minutes, announced the voice from the speakers. The tension in the crowd was palpable now, but it wasn't the dangerous tension of impending violence. It was the focused energy of professional soldiers preparing for a complex mission. Korthak found himself inadvertently checking his own equipment, swept up in the collective anticipation. "You might want to put those weapons back in your car," Mildred suggested gently. "Security gets nervous about that sort of thing, and you don't want to get escorted out before you've had a chance to shop." The suggestion made perfect sense from a tactical perspective, but it left Korthak feeling oddly vulnerable. He had never entered a potentially hostile environment without his full arsenal. However, he was here to observe, not to conquer, and adapting to local customs was part of effective reconnaissance. Reluctantly, he returned to his ship and secured his weapons. When he returned to the line, the humans had saved his place without being asked, which struck him as another example of their inexplicable voluntary cooperation. 5 minutes. The crowd began moving closer to the entrance, maintaining their orderly formation while adjusting for optimal positioning. Korthak noticed that despite the competitive nature of their mission, there was very little pushing or aggressive behavior. The humans seemed to understand that cooperation was more effective than conflict for achieving their objectives. "This is fascinating," he murmured. "First time?" asked a teenage human standing nearby. "It's pretty cool once you get the hang of it. Just remember to stay hydrated and wear comfortable shoes. You'll be doing a lot of walking." "Walking?" "Yeah, the mall is huge. Some of these stores are like half a mile apart. Plus, you'll probably want to comparison shop, which means checking the same items at different stores to make sure you're getting the best price. You conduct comparative analysis of pricing across multiple vendors." "Well, yeah. Why would you buy something without checking if you can get it cheaper somewhere else? That's just basic smart shopping." Korthak stared at the teenager. These humans didn't just engage in retail warfare, they conducted sophisticated economic analysis as part of their standard operating procedures. They were natural strategists, applying military-level planning to their everyday commercial activities. 1 minute. The crowd fell silent, a quiet focus settling over the assembled shoppers. Korthak could feel the collective concentration, the shared anticipation of the mission to come. It reminded him of the moments before a major battle, when trained soldiers prepared to execute complex tactical maneuvers under pressure. Except these weren't soldiers. These were civilians, teachers, retirees, students, office workers, and they were applying military-level organization to buying things they didn't necessarily need at prices that were merely good instead of excellent. The doors opened. What followed was a masterpiece of coordinated movement that would have made his logistics instructors weep with joy. The crowd flowed through the mall entrance in organized waves, each group proceeding directly to their assigned objectives without confusion or conflict. There was no pushing, no shoving, no desperate scrambling for advantage. It was like watching a perfectly executed military maneuver, except instead of capturing strategic positions, they were heading for electronics stores and clothing outlets. Korthak followed Gladys and Mildred, partly because they had invited him to join their tactical unit, and partly because he was too stunned to formulate an independent plan. As they walked through the mall corridors, he tried to process what he was seeing. The mall itself was a massive structure, easily the size of a military base. The corridors were wide enough for heavy vehicle traffic, with clear sightlines and multiple exit routes. The lighting was bright and even, eliminating shadows where enemies could hide. The entire facility was designed for efficient movement of large numbers of people while maintaining visual oversight of all areas. From a military perspective, it was an almost perfect fortress. But it wasn't being used as a fortress. It was being used as a marketplace. Hundreds of individual vendors had established positions throughout the structure, each offering different categories of goods and services. The humans moved between these positions, conducting negotiations and transactions with remarkable efficiency. "This is the electronics store," Gladys announced as they approached a large outlet called Best Buy. "They should have the gaming system on sale. Mildred, you head to the clothing stores and text me if you find anything good. We'll meet at the food court in 2 hours." "Roger that," Mildred replied, and Korthak realized she was using military terminology completely naturally. Inside Best Buy, Korthak witnessed something that challenged every assumption he had ever made about human behavior. Despite the massive crowd and the limited quantity of sale items, the humans formed orderly lines and waited patiently for their turns. When conflicts arose, someone cutting in line or two people reaching for the same item simultaneously, they were resolved through negotiation rather than violence. "Excuse me," said a middle-aged woman to a young man who had inadvertently stepped in front of her. "I think I was here first." "Oh, sorry," the young man replied immediately. "I didn't see you there. Please go ahead." "Thank you so much. I appreciate it." Korthak watched this exchange with growing bewilderment. The woman had identified a territorial dispute and addressed it directly. The man had acknowledged the validity of her claim and voluntarily ceded his position. Both parties had expressed gratitude and courtesy throughout the process. No threats had been made, no weapons had been drawn, no superiors had been consulted to arbitrate the dispute. They had simply worked it out. This happened again and again throughout the store. Humans encountering conflicts and resolving them through communication and mutual agreement. It was like watching diplomacy in action, except these weren't trained diplomats. They were ordinary citizens applying sophisticated conflict resolution techniques to mundane shopping disputes. "Are you finding everything okay?" asked a store employee, approaching Korthak with a friendly smile. "I am conducting reconnaissance," Korthak replied automatically. "Oh, comparison shopping. Smart move. Are you looking for anything specific? I can point you in the right direction." You offer assistance to potential competitors. The employee looked confused. Competitors? Oh, you mean other customers? We help everyone who comes in, that's kind of the point. But if you help me find the best deals, I might purchase items that other customers wanted. Well, yeah, but there's usually enough stuff for everyone. And even if there isn't, it's not my job to decide who gets what. My job is to help people find what they're looking for. Korthak tried to process this. The human was offering aid without expectation of personal benefit, even when doing so might disadvantage other members of his own species. It was altruism on a level that defied every model of rational behavior in his military training. Why? He asked simply. Why what? Why do you help strangers who gain nothing in return? The employee shrugged. Because it's my job, and because it makes people happy, and because, I don't know, it's just what you do. If someone needs help, and you can help them, why wouldn't you? The casual way the human dismissed the concept of self-interested behavior made Korthak's head spin. This wasn't just voluntary cooperation. This was voluntary cooperation with complete strangers, for no apparent personal benefit, as a matter of routine social behavior. Is this normal? Korthak asked. Helping customers? Yeah, pretty much. I mean, some stores are better at it than others, and some employees care more than others, but generally speaking, yeah. Customer service is a big part of retail. Customer service? Making sure people have a good experience when they shop. Answering questions, helping them find things, handling returns, that sort of stuff. The idea is that if people have a good experience, they'll come back and shop here again. Korthak nodded slowly. The humans had developed long-term strategic thinking that prioritized future benefits over immediate gains. They understood that cooperation and assistance created loyalty and repeat business, which was more valuable than short-term competitive advantages. It was brilliant. It was also completely insane from a traditional military perspective. I need to observe more, Korthak muttered. Sure thing. Let me know if you have any questions. For the next hour, Korthak wandered through the electronics store, watching humans interact with each other and with the merchandise. What he saw challenged every assumption he had ever made about intelligent behavior. Customers helped other customers find items, even when those items were in limited supply. Parents supervised their children while simultaneously helping elderly shoppers reach items on high shelves. Teenagers explained technology to confused adults, and adults shared practical advice with teenagers about making smart purchasing decisions. Most remarkably, when the store ran out of a particularly popular item, the disappointed customers didn't riot or demand compensation. They simply accepted it. Some asked when the next shipment would arrive. Others inquired about similar products. A few decided to try other stores, but no one became violent. No one demanded to speak to the manager's superior. No one threatened to take their business elsewhere, as if this would constitute some sort of devastating economic warfare. They just adapted. "Oh, well," said one woman, whose desired gaming console had sold out just before her turn in line. "I guess I'll try Target. Thanks anyway." "Sorry about that," replied the cashier. "We should have more next week if you want to call ahead." "That's okay. I probably should have gotten here earlier. My fault for sleeping in." Korthak stared. The human had accepted responsibility for her failure to achieve her objective, expressed no anger toward the store or its employees, and maintained a cheerful demeanor despite being disappointed. She had demonstrated personal accountability, emotional regulation, and social courtesy under adverse conditions. These weren't the behaviors of a primitive species. These were the behaviors of beings who had evolved sophisticated social and psychological mechanisms for maintaining cooperative relationships under stress. "Sir?" The cashier was looking at him with concern. "Are you okay? You look a little overwhelmed." "I am beginning to question the fundamental nature of reality," Korthak replied honestly. Oh yeah? Black Friday can be intense if you're not used to it. Would you like to sit down for a minute? There's a bench right outside the store. The cashier was offering comfort and assistance to someone who had just admitted to experiencing an existential crisis. This was beyond altruism. This was therapeutic intervention provided by a complete stranger as a matter of casual social courtesy. Korthak stumbled out of the electronic store and found the bench, where he sat down heavily and tried to organize his thoughts. Everything he had observed contradicted the intelligence reports about human primitive behavior. These beings had developed social technologies more advanced than anything in his military experience. They had weaponized kindness. "You okay, buddy?" A security guard approached, his expression concerned rather than suspicious. "You look like you might need some help." "I am a trained military operative," Korthak said weakly. "I have conquered civilizations. I have brought empires to their knees. I have never encountered anything like this." "Like what? Shopping? Like voluntary cooperation on this scale? Like organized altruism? Like psychological warfare disguised as customer service?" The security guard sat down next to him on the bench. "You know, you're not the first person to have that reaction to Black Friday. It can be pretty overwhelming, especially if you're not used to crowds. Want me to call someone for you?" "Call someone? Family, friends, whoever. Sometimes it helps to talk to someone familiar when you're feeling disoriented." Korthak considered this. The human was offering to facilitate communication with his support network, despite having no obligation to do so and no way of knowing whether Korthak even had a support network. It was the sort of compassionate intervention that suggested sophisticated understanding of psychological crisis management. "You are trained in crisis intervention?" he asked. "Not really. Just basic stuff they teach us in security training. De-escalation, when to call for backup, how to spot someone who might need medical attention. But mostly it's just common sense. If someone seems upset, you ask if they need help." Common sense? Yeah, like basic human decency, I guess. Looking out for each other. There it was again. The casual assumption that helping strangers was normal, expected behavior. Not something requiring special training or formal protocols, but simply what humans did as a matter of course. "I need to report this to my superiors," Korthak said, pulling out his communication device. "Your superiors? My commanding officers. They need to know what we're dealing with here." The security guard looked at the device with interest. "That's a pretty fancy phone. What do you do for work?" "I am a military reconnaissance specialist for the Andromedan Galactic Empire." "Oh, cool. Like military intelligence. My brother-in-law was in the army. He always said intelligence work was really interesting, but mostly involved a lot of paperwork." The guard's complete lack of concern about Korthak's claim to represent an alien military force was somehow more disturbing than outright disbelief would have been. Either humans were so advanced that contact with alien species was routine, or they were so psychologically resilient that they could process impossible information without distress. Korthak activated his communication device and sent an emergency message to Admiral Thunderbeak. "Require immediate strategic consultation. Human capabilities exceed all projections. Recommend full policy review before proceeding with any contact protocols." The response came back within minutes. "Explain. Are they hostile?" Korthak stared at the question. Were they hostile? He had spent 2 hours among them and hadn't encountered a single act of aggression. They had treated him with kindness, offered assistance, and provided emotional support during his psychological crisis. If this was hostility, it was the most sophisticated form of psychological warfare he had ever encountered. He typed back, "Humans have weaponized cooperation. They have turned altruism into a strategic advantage. Their society appears to function through voluntary coordination and mutual assistance, at levels that suggest either advanced social evolution or psychological manipulation techniques beyond our current understanding. Requesting extraction for full briefing." "Extraction denied. Continue observation as planned." Korthak stared at the message. How could he continue observation when every minute among these beings challenged his fundamental understanding of intelligent behavior? How could he maintain his analytical objectivity when they kept being nice to him? Bad news from work? The security guard asked, noticing his expression. My superiors want me to continue my mission despite the fact that I am completely unprepared for the psychological complexity of your species. Yeah, bosses can be like that sometimes. They don't always understand what it's like on the ground, you know. But hey, you seem like a smart guy. I'm sure you'll figure it out. The guard's confidence in Korthak's abilities, despite knowing nothing about his qualifications or experience, was another example of the inexplicable human tendency to offer encouragement to strangers. It was as if they had evolved to provide psychological support as a default social behavior. Why are you helping me? Korthak asked. Because you seem like you could use some help, and because it's my job to make sure people feel safe and comfortable in the mall. And because, the guard shrugged. I don't know, it's just what you do. That phrase again. It's just what you do. As if kindness was as natural and inevitable as breathing. Korthak stood up slowly, his mind reeling with implications. If humans had evolved to cooperate and assist each other as a matter of instinctive behavior, then their entire civilization was built on foundations that made traditional military conquest impossible. You couldn't intimidate beings who responded to threats by offering help. You couldn't divide beings who naturally formed cooperative alliances with strangers. You couldn't conquer beings who would probably try to make sure you were comfortable during the conquest. I must observe more, he said aloud. Sure thing. The mall's got tons of stuff to see, food courts on the upper level if you get hungry, and there's a directory by the main entrance if you need help finding anything specific. As Korthak walked away from the bench, he heard the security guard's radio crackle with a call about a minor dispute near the jewelry store. The guard's response was immediate and professional. On my way. Any injuries? No? Okay, probably just a misunderstanding. I'll sort it out. Even their conflict resolution protocols assumed that disputes were honest mistakes rather than malicious actions. They approached problems with the expectation that reasonable solutions could be found through communication and good faith negotiation. It was the most optimistic worldview Korthak had ever encountered, and the terrifying thing was that it seemed to work. He spent the next hour observing human behavior throughout the mall, and each new interaction deepened his sense of bewilderment. At a clothing store, he watched a mother with 3 small children receive unsolicited assistance from complete strangers when her youngest began crying. Instead of avoiding the disruption, other shoppers offered distractions for the child, helped carry packages, and provided patient encouragement to the overwhelmed parent. Is this normal behavior? Korthak asked a nearby teenage human who was folding t-shirts. What? Helping someone with kids? Yeah, totally. Kids can be a handful, and shopping with them is super stressful. Mom looks like she's about to have a breakdown. So you assist her to prevent psychological collapse? I guess. I mean, we help because it's the right thing to do. Plus, crying kids are really loud, and if we can help calm the situation down, everyone benefits. Korthak noted this. The humans had identified that individual distress could affect group harmony, and they had developed spontaneous intervention protocols to address disruptions through collective assistance rather than exclusion or punishment. At the bookstore, he observed humans engaging in something even more inexplicable. They were recommending books to each other. Not just employees providing customer service, but customers providing advice to other customers about which books they might enjoy. Oh, you like that series? An elderly man was saying to a young woman browsing the fantasy section. Then you absolutely have to read this one. Same author, but even better character development. Really? Thanks. I've been looking for something new to read. My pleasure. I love finding new readers for my favorite authors. The man gained nothing from this interaction. The woman wasn't his friend or family member. He had no financial interest in her purchase decision. Yet he had voluntarily invested time and effort in improving her reading experience. "Excuse me," Korthak said, approaching the man. "Why did you provide assistance to that female?" "Because she was looking for book recommendations, and I had some good ones to share. Reading is more fun when you discover great new stories." "But you receive no compensation for this service." "Compensation?" The man looked puzzled. "Why would I need compensation for recommending a book? It takes like 30 seconds, and it might make her day better. That's reward enough." Korthak stared at him. The human had explicitly stated that improving a stranger's emotional state was sufficient reward for providing unpaid labor. This suggested that humans had evolved to derive satisfaction from the happiness of others, even when those others were complete strangers. It was the most sophisticated form of social bonding he had ever encountered. At the toy store, things got even stranger. Korthak watched children playing with demonstration toys while their parents shopped, and noticed that the children had spontaneously organized themselves into cooperative playgroups. They shared toys, took turns, and resolved disputes through negotiation rather than competition. "Your offspring cooperate voluntarily?" he asked a parent who was watching her daughter play with a group of unfamiliar children. "Usually, yeah. Kids are pretty good at figuring out how to play together if you let them. They just want to have fun, and they quickly learn that everyone has more fun when they share and take turns." "They learn this behavior. Some of it's natural, some of it's learned. We teach them to be kind and considerate, but they also figure out a lot of it on their own." "Kids are smarter than most people give them credit for." Korthak observed the children more carefully. They were indeed demonstrating sophisticated social skills: conflict mediation, resource allocation, group decision-making, and collaborative problem-solving. And they were doing it while playing, as if cooperation was so natural to them that they practiced it recreationally. This was how humans trained their next generation. Not through military drills or competitive dominance exercises, but through cooperative play that taught them to work together instinctively. By the time he reached the food court, Korthak's worldview had been thoroughly demolished. What he found there completed the destruction. The food court was organized chaos on a scale that defied rational analysis. Dozens of food vendors offered different cuisines from around the world, and humans moved between them with the same tactical precision he had observed during the initial shopping assault. But here, the complexity was multiplied by the need to coordinate not just purchasing decisions, but also seating arrangements, meal timing, and dietary preferences. And somehow it worked. Families with different food preferences split up to purchase meals from different vendors, then regrouped at shared tables. Strangers shared tables when seating was limited, engaging in polite conversation while respecting each other's privacy. People with special dietary needs received assistance from vendors and other customers in identifying suitable options. Most remarkably, when conflicts arose, someone taking too long to order, disputes over seating, spills and accidents, they were resolved through the same pattern of communication and cooperation he had observed throughout the mall. "I'm so sorry," said a woman who had accidentally bumped into Korthak while carrying a full tray of food. "Are you okay? Did I get anything on you?" "You are apologizing for an accidental collision?" Korthak asked. "Of course. I wasn't watching where I was going. Here, let me get you some napkins in case anything splashed." She had taken responsibility for an accident that was equally his fault, and was now offering to help mitigate any consequences he might have suffered. It was the sort of personal accountability and proactive problem-solving that would have impressed his most elite troops. "Why do you accept responsibility for shared causation?" Because that's what you do? When something goes wrong, you try to fix it, even if it's not entirely your fault. It's just easier that way, and it helps everyone move on. There it was again, the casual assumption that cooperation and responsibility were natural responses to problems, even when those problems could be attributed to multiple causes or random chance. Korthak found an empty table and sat down to process what he had observed. His communication device buzzed with another message from Admiral Thunderbeak. Status report. What are human military capabilities? Korthak stared at the question. How could he explain that humans had no conventional military capabilities because they had evolved beyond the need for them? How could he describe a species that had weaponized kindness so effectively that traditional conquest was impossible? He began typing, "Human military capabilities are negligible in conventional terms. However, they have developed social technologies that make them immune to standard conquest protocols. They practice universal cooperation, voluntary resource sharing, and mutual assistance as default behaviors. Their society functions through collective problem-solving, rather than hierarchical command structures. Traditional intimidation techniques are ineffective because they respond to aggression with increased cooperation and assistance." He paused, then added, "They have achieved social cohesion without authoritarian control. They coordinate complex group activities through informal communication and voluntary compliance with flexible rule systems. Their conflict resolution protocols assume good faith and prioritize mutual benefit over individual advantage. Request immediate policy revision regarding this species." The response was immediate. "Explain threat level." Korthak considered this. What was the threat level of a species that could probably conquer the galaxy simply by being nice to everyone they met? "Maximum," he typed, "but not in conventional terms. They represent a complete paradigm shift in social organization. Contact with this species could destabilize our entire command structure by demonstrating that cooperation is more effective than domination for achieving large-scale coordination." "Understood. Continue observation. Report when assessment complete." "I continue observation." Korthak looked around the food court, where hundreds of humans were demonstrating advanced social technologies that made his military training obsolete. How was he supposed to continue observation when every minute among them made him question the fundamental assumptions underlying his civilization? "Excuse me, are you using this chair?" A young human gestured to an empty seat at his table. "No," Korthak replied automatically. "Thanks. The place is really crowded today." The young man sat down and began unpacking what appeared to be a meal from multiple food vendors. "Black Friday shopping is crazy, isn't it? But totally worth it for the deals." "You find this enjoyable?" Korthak asked. "Oh, definitely. I mean, it's exhausting and the crowds can be overwhelming, but there's something really fun about the whole experience. It's like a treasure hunt, except the treasure is discounted electronics and the hunt takes place in an air-conditioned building with snack food." The human had described retail warfare in terms of recreational activity. He was participating in complex logistical operations for entertainment value, not because he was compelled to do so by necessity or authority. "Why do you engage in recreational commerce?" "Recreational commerce?" The young man laughed. "I like that. I guess because it's fun to find good deals, and I enjoy the challenge of navigating the crowds and finding what I'm looking for. Plus, I'm Christmas shopping for my family, so there's that satisfaction of finding perfect gifts for people you care about." "You purchase gifts for others?" "Of course, that's like the whole point of Christmas shopping, finding things that will make your family and friends happy. It's one of my favorite parts of the holidays." Korthak tried to process this. The human was investing significant time, energy, and resources in acquiring objects for the sole purpose of giving them to other people to increase their happiness. This represented resource allocation based on altruistic priorities rather than personal benefit. "Does your family require these gifts?" "Require? No, not really. I mean, everyone can buy their own stuff, but gifts are different. They show that you were thinking about someone, that you put effort into finding something they'd like. It's not about the money or the stuff. It's about showing you care. You demonstrate emotional attachment through material offerings? Well, when you put it like that, it sounds kind of weird, the young man said with a grin. But yeah, I guess that's part of it. Gifts are just one way of showing people you love them. There are lots of other ways, too. Spending time together, doing favors, just being there when someone needs support. Korthak felt something that might have been despair. Not only had humans weaponized cooperation, they had developed multiple systems for reinforcing social bonds through voluntary expressions of care and support. Their entire social structure was built on a foundation of mutual assistance and emotional investment in each other's well-being. No wonder their civilization functioned without authoritarian control. When everyone genuinely cared about everyone else's happiness, external coercion became unnecessary. I must ask, Korthak said carefully, do all humans behave this way? What way? Cooperatively, helpfully, with concern for others' well-being. The young man considered this. I mean, most people try to be decent to each other most of the time. There are definitely jerks out there, and everyone has bad days when they're not at their best. But generally speaking, yeah, most people want to get along and help each other out when they can. It just makes life easier and more pleasant for everyone. Even strangers. Especially strangers sometimes. Like if you see someone struggling with something and you can help, why wouldn't you? It doesn't cost you anything, and it might really make their day. Plus, you never know when you might need help from a stranger yourself. The human had articulated a philosophy of reciprocal altruism based on enlightened self-interest, but implemented through genuine concern for others. It was the most sophisticated approach to social cooperation Korthak had ever encountered. A commotion near the pizza vendor caught his attention. A family with several children had apparently ordered food, but their payment method had been declined. The parents were frantically searching through wallets and purses while their children watched with growing embarrassment. Korthak expected to see the typical response to such situations: security intervention, removal from the premises, public humiliation to discourage similar incidents. What happened instead challenged his understanding of economic systems. The pizza vendor quietly set the family's order aside and called over another employee. After a brief conversation, the employee approached the family with a discreet offer. They could pay when they found their working payment method, or they could provide contact information and pay later. Don't worry about it, the vendor said kindly. These things happen. Just take the food and pay us back when you can. But that wasn't the end of it. Other customers in line had overheard the situation, and several of them quietly offered to cover the family's meal cost. The family was overwhelmed by the generosity and tried to decline, but the other customers insisted. "We've all been there," said one woman, handing money to the cashier. "Sometimes cards get declined for no good reason. Don't worry about it. Pay it forward when you get the chance," added another customer. "That's how these things work." Korthak watched in amazement as complete strangers spontaneously organized a financial assistance operation for a family they had never met and would probably never see again. There was no institutional framework requiring this assistance, no government program or corporate policy mandating aid for payment difficulties. They just helped because they could and because they thought it was the right thing to do. "Pay it forward?" Korthak asked the young man at his table. "Oh, that's just the idea that when someone helps you, you help someone else when you get the chance. Instead of paying them back directly, you pass the kindness along to someone who needs it. It keeps the good karma flowing." Good karma? The idea that being kind to others makes the world a better place, and that kindness tends to come back to you eventually. Maybe not from the same person, but from someone. It's like investing in a better world for everyone. Korthak felt his remaining certainties crumble. The humans had developed a philosophical framework that encouraged altruistic behavior, not through moral obligation or social pressure, but through enlightened self-interest in collective well-being. They understood that improving conditions for others ultimately improved conditions for themselves. It was the most advanced social technology he had ever encountered, and they implemented it through informal cultural practices rather than formal governmental control. His communication device buzzed again. Another message from Admiral Thunderbeak. Intelligence reports suggest humans may have advanced psychological warfare capabilities. Confirm or deny. Korthak looked around the food court, where humans continued to demonstrate psychological warfare capabilities that consisted of being nice to each other and solving problems through cooperation. Confirmed, he typed back, but not as we understand the term. Human psychological warfare consists of relentless kindness, universal cooperation, and voluntary mutual assistance. Traditional defense mechanisms are ineffective against sustained exposure to genuine altruism. Recommendation? Korthak thought about this carefully. What was his recommendation? That the Andromedan Empire abandon its plans for galactic conquest because they had encountered beings who were too nice to fight? That they revise their entire military doctrine because humans had proven that cooperation was more effective than domination? That they surrender to a species that would probably insist on helping them figure out a mutually beneficial arrangement instead of accepting their surrender? Immediate quarantine of this system, he typed. Finally, humans represent a contamination risk to existing social structures. Prolonged exposure to their cooperation-based society could destabilize military hierarchy and undermine command authority. Recommend reclassification of Earth as a no-contact zone. Explain contamination risk. How could he explain that spending 3 hours among humans had made him question everything he had ever believed about the necessity of authoritarian control? How could he describe the growing realization that his entire civilization was built on assumptions that humans had proven false? Human social technologies are incompatible with military command structures, he typed. They have achieved large-scale coordination through voluntary cooperation rather than hierarchical authority. Exposure to their methods could inspire similar organizational changes in our own personnel. Understood. Begin extraction procedures. Korthak almost laughed. Begin extraction procedures? He was sitting in a mall food court surrounded by beings who would probably insist on helping him with his luggage and providing snacks for his journey home. They would ask if he had enjoyed his visit and recommend places he should see if he ever came back. They would treat his military extraction like a friendly farewell party. Sir? The young man at his table was looking at him with concern. Are you okay? You look a little pale. I am experiencing what you might call an existential crisis, Korthak replied honestly. Oh, those are rough. I had one of those during my sophomore year of college. Spent like 3 weeks questioning everything I thought I knew about life and purpose and meaning. Want to talk about it? You offer therapeutic consultation to strangers? I offer friendly conversation to people who look like they might need it. Sometimes it helps to talk through stuff with someone who doesn't have any investment in your decisions. Korthak stared at him. The human was offering psychological support services to someone he had just met, with no expectation of compensation or reciprocal benefit. It was professional-level therapeutic intervention provided as casual social courtesy. Why? He asked simply. Because you look like you're going through something difficult, and talking to someone can help. Because I've been there, and I know how isolating existential crises can be. Because, the young man shrugged, because it's just what you do when someone seems to be struggling. That phrase again. It's just what you do. As if kindness was as natural and inevitable as gravity. Korthak's communication device buzzed with coordinates for extraction. His ship would be waiting in the parking lot, ready to take him away from this world of incomprehensible cooperation and back to the familiar brutality of galactic conquest. I must go, he said, standing up. "Sure thing. I hope your existential crisis resolves itself. Those can be really transformative if you let them. Sometimes questioning everything is the first step toward finding better answers." As Korthak walked toward the mall exit, he passed Gladys and Mildred, who were comparing their purchases and planning their next strategic shopping operation. "Oh, hello again," Gladys called out cheerfully. "How did your reconnaissance mission go?" "It was illuminating," Korthak replied. "That's wonderful. Did you find everything you were looking for?" Korthak considered this question. Had he found what he was looking for? He had come to assess human military capabilities and had discovered that they had no conventional military capabilities at all. He had come to evaluate their threat level and had found that they represented the most dangerous challenge to his civilization's core assumptions that he could imagine. He had come to conduct surveillance on primitive beings and had instead encountered the most advanced social technologies in the galaxy. "I found more than I was looking for," he said finally. "Oh, that's the best kind of shopping trip," Mildred declared, "when you discover things you didn't even know you needed." As he walked out into the parking lot, Korthak realized that Mildred had unknowingly summarized his entire mission. He had discovered things he didn't even know he needed. New ways of thinking about cooperation, alternative approaches to social organization, and a fundamental challenge to every assumption about the nature of intelligent behavior. His ship was waiting exactly where he had left it, its stealth systems ensuring that no human could detect its presence. But as he prepared to board, Korthak found himself hesitating. Once he left Earth, he would have to write a report that would change the course of galactic history. His assessment would determine whether humans remained in peaceful isolation or became targets for military intervention. His recommendations would shape first contact protocols for generations to come, and he had absolutely no idea what to recommend. He activated his communication system one final time and sent a message to Admiral Thunderbeak. "Mission complete. Returning for full briefing. Recommend immediate policy review session with all senior command staff. Human contact protocols require complete revision." "Understood. Safe travels, General." As Korthak's ship lifted off from the parking lot, he looked down at the mall where hundreds of humans continued their daily activities, unaware that they had just revolutionized galactic military doctrine simply by being themselves. 12 minutes. That's how long it had taken for the most feared military commander in the Andromedan Empire to realize that everything he thought he knew about intelligent behavior was wrong. 12 minutes of exposure to weaponized kindness, organized altruism, and voluntary cooperation had accomplished what no enemy force had ever managed. They had made General Korthak Doomwhisper question the fundamental assumptions underlying his entire civilization. And the most terrifying part was that they had done it completely by accident. As Earth shrank behind him, Korthak began composing the most important military report in galactic history. It would be classified at the highest levels, studied by xenopsychologists and strategic analysts, and ultimately filed away in the same vault that contained the galaxy's most dangerous secrets. But its conclusions would reshape everything. Humans were not to be conquered, contacted, or threatened. They were to be left alone to continue developing their impossibly advanced social technologies in peaceful isolation. Because any species that could accidentally convert a hardened military commander to pacifism simply by being nice to him represented a threat level beyond conventional military classification. They were too dangerous to fight and too kind to fear. They had weaponized compassion and militarized mutual aid. They had created a society so fundamentally cooperative that exposure to it could cause existential crises in trained killers. In the end, the strongest soldier in the galaxy had tapped out not because he had been defeated, but because he had been converted. And the most dangerous part was that the humans had no idea they had done it. They probably would have insisted on giving him a going-away present.